"She's unstable. We need to do something," Tessa whispered. Evelyn, her 67-year-old mother-in-law, calmly emailed her lawyer, attaching a notarized mental evaluation. By nightfall, the locks were changed. Only 2 keys existed now, hers and her niece Camille's. Her son didn't say goodbye when he left with Tessa and a moving van. Evelyn stood at the threshold, holding the deed and her silence like armor. "Wait, before we go any further, I gotta ask, where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe." She didn't say it to me, but she wanted me to hear it. The sound came between cycles of the washing machine, faint but sharp, like a needle slipping through cloth. Evelyn paused mid-fold, a pale blue towel still warm in her hands. The voices weren't meant for her, but the volume had been calibrated perfectly for her proximity. "She should be grateful to have a roof," Tessa whispered. The pause that followed wasn't silence, it was complicity. Mark didn't respond. Of course he didn't. Evelyn stood in the laundry room doorway, her back to the hallway, breath steady. Her eyes remained fixed on the towel as she folded it with deliberate care. One corner, then the other. Press stack. Repeat. She'd lived in this house for 42 years, raised Mark in it, buried a husband and a dog in the garden out back. The beams creaked in certain places not because they were old, but because they remembered her weight. This wasn't just a roof, it was her spine in lumber and tile. 9 months ago, Mark and Tessa had moved in after Mark's tech startup fizzled. "Just until things stabilize," he'd said. Evelyn had nodded, already clearing the guest room. Now, Tessa rearranged her bookshelves without asking, rolled her eyes at anything not seasoned with Himalayan salt, called Evelyn's quilts clutter. And Mark, he simply stayed quiet, as though neutrality were some form of grace. Evelyn slid the last towel into the linen basket and clicked off the washer. She didn't speak. She didn't confront. That wasn't her way. Not yet. She walked quietly back to her room, each footstep soundless on the oak flooring she and her husband had laid themselves, board by board, during the summer of '89. Inside her room, she closed the door gently and knelt in front of the bottom drawer of her wardrobe. The lock on the safe was mechanical. No beeps, no digital pads. Just 3 clicks left, 2 right, 1 back. She pulled out the deed. The edges were slightly curled, the paper thick, official. Her name printed clean across the top, Evelyn Harper, owner, trustee, widow. She held it in her lap for a moment, fingertips brushing the embossed county seal. The same seal she'd stared at when she and her husband made the final payment 12 years ago and toasted over cheap wine and a frozen pie. Evelyn stood, carried the title to her desk, and placed it beside her laptop. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. But her shoulders straightened, not out of anger but resolve. Across the room, the light caught a photo of Mark at age 10. Missing front teeth, baseball cap too big for his head, grinning beside the hydrangeas they planted together. She picked it up, held it, then set it face down. On the desk, she opened her email client. Her lawyer's name was already in the autofill, Sonia Patel-esque. She typed slowly. Subject, title, question. Body, how fast can we transfer ownership? She hit send. Then she closed the laptop, stood again, and pulled a small moving box from the closet. The kind you save. Just in case. She placed it on the bed and began filling it, not with clothes, but with clarity. Her birth certificate, passport, insurance documents, the original blueprints of the house, with her husband's handwritten notes in the margins. As she packed, the house around her remained silent, but it wasn't empty. It was listening. And for the first time in months, it was listening to her. She texts her lawyer, "How fast can we transfer ownership?" They thought I owed them. I forgot I ever did. The next morning, Evelyn arrived at Sonia Patel's office 15 minutes early. The building was a converted Craftsman near the courthouse, its front porch still painted robin's egg blue, its railing worn smooth by years of hands resting before hard conversations. Inside, the waiting room smelled faintly of bergamot and clean paper. Evelyn sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, the deed tucked inside a manila folder beside her purse. Sonia greeted her promptly at 9, mid-40s, sharp but kind, with sleeves rolled just enough to show she meant business. Let's take a look, she said, ushering Evelyn back to a corner office lined with law books and soft light. Evelyn placed the folder on the desk. Sonia opened it and scanned the title. Still clean. No liens. Fully paid off. Evelyn nodded. And according to my estate file? Sonia clicked through her screen, eyes scanning. House is currently set to transfer to your son upon your passing. Joint survivorship clause. Standard setup. Probably done around the time you made your last will? Right after my husband died, Evelyn said. Mark was the only child. It felt automatic. Sonia looked up. Still want that to stand? Evelyn didn't blink. Let's change that. While I'm breathing. Sonia leaned back slightly, considering. We have two good options. You can update your will and add a restriction clause, but wills can be contested, especially by immediate family. Or, we can move the house into a living trust. That gives you total control now and locks future transfers based on your terms. Evelyn didn't hesitate. Trust. And I want a new beneficiary. My niece, Camille. Sonia began typing. Anyone likely to challenge it? My daughter-in-law thinks subtle insults don't leave fingerprints. And my son hasn't looked me in the eye in months. Sonia stopped typing briefly. You sure about Camille? Evelyn smiled, almost wistfully. She brings groceries, hugs with both arms, and doesn't rearrange my bookshelf like she's restaging my life. Trust it is, Sonia said with a small approving nod. They spent the next hour reviewing terms, durable power of attorney, revocation clauses, disinheritance protocol. Sonia was effect, but thorough, walking Evelyn through each paragraph like a partner rather than a gatekeeper. Evelyn signed the initial draft and slipped a hard copy into her purse. Back home, the silence greeted her like a knowing glance. Tessa's shoes were by the door. Pointed flats Evelyn had tripped over twice. Mark's keys tossed carelessly on the entryway table. The house still smelled faintly of cinnamon from the oatmeal Evelyn had made that morning. Neither of them had touched it. She walked into her room, opened a drawer, and pulled out a slim notebook with floral print on the cover. She wrote the date at the top and began. Tessa rolled her eyes when I offered tea. Mark said nothing when she called my quilt antique in the bad way. Tessa moved the mixer from the counter to the pantry without asking. Each entry was dated, brief, and surgical. Not for argument. For record. Later that afternoon, Camille arrived with a tote bag full of groceries and a smile that didn't demand anything in return. She unpacked apples, lentils, and a bouquet of fresh parsley from her own garden. I figured you could use something green today, she said, handing it over. Evelyn took it gently. You're the only person who brings more than they take. Camille shrugged, offered a half hug. That's what family's for. After Camille left, Evelyn returned to her room and placed the trust draft in the same drawer where she kept her husband's last birthday card. She felt something inside her spine lengthen. Not pride, not spite, just the return of ownership. That evening, as she passed the guest room on the way to the linen closet, Evelyn paused. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, she heard Tessa's voice again, lower, amused. Eventually, it'll be ours anyway. Evelyn stood still, then walked back to her room, not in fear, but in preparation. Evelyn overhears Tessa saying, "It'll be our house eventually anyway." They walked its halls like owners. I remember scrubbing those floors during chemo. The hallway echoed faintly with the sound of shoes, not hers, heels tapping like declarations, steps too sure for someone without a mortgage. Evelyn paused at the base of the stairs, hand grazing the banister that had once been Mark's jungle gym and her husband's leaning post during chemo. The wood still bore a faint scratch from the IV stand tipping sideways one afternoon, long before Tessa had ever set foot on this side of the threshold. She moved slowly, not out of fragility, but out of reverence. Every creak in the floorboard was a language she spoke fluently. This wasn't a house. It was history. In the living room, Evelyn stopped short. The curtains, floral ones she and her husband had picked out in 1984, the ones that still smelled faintly of lavender detergent and June air, were gone. In their place, sheer white panels, sterile and stiff, hung without ceremony. Tessa stood nearby, tapping her phone screen. "You changed the curtains?" Evelyn asked evenly. Tessa didn't look up. They were dated. The lighting's better this way. Evelyn nodded once, like a judge acknowledging testimony, then turned and walked back to her bedroom. She opened her file cabinet and pulled out a stack of household bills: water, gas, electric, all co-listed. A kindness she had offered once, no more. She logged into each account, removed every secondary user, changed passwords, re-registered under her full legal name. The utility companies didn't ask why. They never do. When she finished, she leaned back, letting the new paperwork sit beside her like armor. Then she pulled out her notebook and added a new line. Tessa removed curtains from 1984. Didn't ask. Called them dated. Later that week, Camille came by. Evelyn had asked if she knew how to scan documents. The girl had laughed. Aunt Ev, I do taxes for people my age who don't know what a W-2 is. Yes, I can scan. Together, they spent the afternoon digitizing old receipts, appliance warranties, maintenance logs. Camille labeled each file with intuitive names: roof inspection, 2019, boiler warranty, and a folder titled simply Trust Docs. You're organized, Camille said. I've been underestimated, Evelyn replied. Organization is the soft revenge. When they finished, Camille made tea. Evelyn disappeared upstairs. She moved like a woman rehearsing something she'd already decided. From the hall closet, she pulled down a small cardboard box. Inside, a compact home security camera system she'd ordered online 2 weeks ago, just in case. Just in case had arrived. She installed the main camera in the foyer, nestled it inside a ceramic vase on the top shelf. Nothing visible, nothing dramatic, but it watched the front door now, and it remembered. Before going to bed, Evelyn stood in front of the bathroom mirror and picked up a sticky note from the medicine cabinet. She wrote in capital letters, I built this roof. I owe no one shade. She pressed it to the mirror. That night the house felt still, not passive, but poised. The next morning, while cleaning out a side drawer in the buffet table, Evelyn paused. Tucked beneath a stack of old coasters and a broken drawer pull was a sleek, glossy business card. Midtown Real Estate Daniel Kilmer, residential sales on the back, in tidy blue ink. Tessa, call me if plans firm up. Evelyn stood still for several seconds. No shock, just slow, icy comprehension. She slipped the card into her notebook, dated the page, and added one more line. Evelyn finds a realtor's card tucked in a drawer, Tessa's name written on back. They'd appraised my house like it was a temporary Airbnb. The next day, Evelyn waited in the front room with the card balanced delicately between her fingers. The name, Daniel Kilmer, seemed too polished for the backhanded message scribbled behind it, but she wanted to be sure. At 3:15 p.m. sharp, a white SUV pulled up the drive. She watched as a man stepped out, hair styled with that faintly wet look of someone who took himself very seriously. Buttoned blazer, clipboard, confident stride. She opened the door before he knocked. Daniel Kilmer? He blinked, surprised. Yes, is this the Ames property? This is the Harper residence, she said evenly. You left your card here. Tessa said you'd been by. He shifted. Yes. I just dropped by for a soft walkthrough. Your daughter-in-law said it was fine. She asked for an estimate. Mentioned the house might be changing hands soon. Evelyn smiled softly. Not warmly. She mentioned an inheritance? Something like that, yes. I assumed you were, that you were aware. I wasn't, Evelyn said, but I am now. Daniel tried to recover. Look, it wasn't formal, no paperwork, just a quick look around. Evelyn tilted her head, then said, You've seen enough. You may go. He stammered slightly, but obeyed. As his SUV reversed down the driveway, Evelyn stepped back inside and clicked the door shut behind her. Her hands didn't shake, her pulse didn't rise. Instead, she walked calmly to her laptop and opened a new email. To Sonia Patel, Esquire. Subject, Property Directive. Body. Hi Sonia, please file a formal notice that no appraisals or property access be permitted without the owner's written consent. No exceptions. Thank you. E.H. She hit send. Then, with a careful hand, she retrieved the original deed and placed it inside the fireproof box she kept under her bed. This time, she added a second lock, just in case. The next morning, Evelyn called Camille. "Can you help me schedule something?" "Anything," Camille replied. "Deep cleaning. I want every surface scrubbed, every corner reset." Camille was there within 2 hours, ponytail high, sleeves rolled. Together they sorted cabinets, dusted vents, polished the dining table that hadn't seen a proper holiday since before Mark's wedding. Evelyn opened the spare linen closet and pulled out her old drapes, the heavy velvet set in a rose gold damask pattern, the ones Tessa had said looked too nostalgic. They were washed, ironed, and back on the rods by sundown. The throw pillows came next. The floral tea set. The brass lamp with the pull chain her husband had rewired in 1996. By evening, the living room looked less like a showroom and more like memory made tangible. Camille stood back and smiled. "It feels like yours again." Evelyn exhaled softly. "That's because it is." Later that night, Evelyn pulled the notebook from her dresser drawer and added 2 entries. Realtor confirmed Tessa called about inheritance. Property reclaimed, 1 curtain at a time. 2 days passed. On the 3rd, Evelyn came home from the market to find Mark and Tessa sitting stiffly on the couch, arms crossed like witnesses waiting to testify. Tessa spoke first, voice cold. "So you just decided to change everything without consulting us?" Evelyn set her purse down. "Consult you? About my curtains?" Mark stepped in. "You didn't even ask us." Evelyn turned to him slowly, voice steady. "Neither did you." Mark says, "You didn't even ask us." Evelyn replies, "Neither did you. They thought silence meant surrender. I was just waiting for it to be legal." The rain had softened overnight, leaving a glisten on Evelyn's front steps as she walked down them just after sunrise, the manila folder tucked securely in her bag. By the time she arrived at Sonia Patel's office, the clouds were pulling back, and a thin light filtered through the windows, gray but steady. Sonia didn't bother with pleasantries this time. She simply nodded, gestured toward the chair, and turned her monitor toward Evelyn. "It's done," she said. "The house is now officially in the trust. You're the sole trustee. Camille is named as successor beneficiary." Evelyn inhaled slowly. It felt like the first full breath she'd taken in months. Sonia tapped her keyboard once more. "We've included a revocation clause. Any challenge to the trust, formal or informal, triggers full forfeiture of claim. No debates, no court filings. It's airtight." Evelyn nodded, her voice calm. "Good. I want them to know what silence really meant." She leaned forward and opened the folder on the desk, scanning each page, letting her eyes land firmly on the section that named Camille. There it was, legal recognition of what her gut had known all along. Family isn't inherited, it's demonstrated. Sonia slid a second document across the desk. "You asked for a clean copy to give to your son. Just the basics. Trust language, title reassignment, legal boundaries, no opinion, just fact." Evelyn placed the document carefully back into the folder, then zipped it shut with finality. "I'll leave it for him tonight, quietly." Sonia looked at her for a moment before adding, "I hope this brings you some peace." Evelyn didn't smile, but her voice was soft. Peace was never the issue. Ownership was. Back home, the house was quiet. Tessa had taken her Pilates class, and Mark was in the backyard fiddling with the irrigation system, another task he never completed, only disturbed. Evelyn didn't say a word to either of them. Instead, she made tea, stood in the kitchen while the kettle hissed, and watched the steam rise like something exhaling with her. She waited until after midnight. When the lights in the guest room dimmed and the hum of the TV had stopped, she moved through the hallway with a deliberateness that didn't feel sneaky, just necessary. She slipped the envelope under Mark's door at precisely 3:07 a.m. No note, no warning, just the truth, wrapped in letterhead and legality. She didn't sleep that night, not because she was anxious, but because the house felt too awake, like it was holding its breath with her. The next morning, Evelyn made her usual oatmeal and set the table for herself only. Camille would be by later with some documents to notarize and maybe a new herb cutting for the garden, but for now the silence felt earned. Mark entered first. He looked vaguely confused but not confrontational. He opened the fridge, poured juice, said nothing. Tessa entered moments later, holding the envelope like it had burned her fingers. "What the hell is this?" she snapped, brandishing the paper. Evelyn didn't look up from her spoon. She stirred once, slowly, then set it down gently. "That," she said, "is the new title." Tessa blinked. "You can't just change everything without telling us." Evelyn's eyes were quiet but unyielding. "It's not yours to be told." Mark opened his mouth, but then closed it again. The silence he used to shield himself now sat like a boundary around him. He was no longer protected by it, he was defined by it. Tessa dropped the envelope on the table like it might still bite. "I don't believe this," she muttered. Evelyn reached for her cup of tea and took a sip before answering. "You don't have to believe it," she said. "You just have to leave it be." The room was still. The storm had passed, but the air still buzzed with what it had changed. Outside, Camille's car pulled into the driveway. And inside, for the first time since they moved in, Evelyn didn't feel like a guest in her own home. At breakfast, Tessa says, "What the hell is this?" She yelled like it was still hers. I replied like it never was. Tessa's voice pierced through the walls before Evelyn even reached the hallway. "She's lost it," she snapped. "This is delusional. She thinks she can just rewrite reality because she's got a file folder and a lawyer?" Evelyn didn't flinch. She moved slowly through the kitchen, rinsing her cup from breakfast with the same calmness she once used to wash bottles at midnight decades ago. Mark said nothing. His footsteps creaked faintly, pacing near the dining table, but he didn't join the chorus. "Mark," Tessa said louder, "you need to say something. This is about your family, your future. Are you really just going to stand there and let her hand this place off to Camille like we don't exist?" Evelyn dried her hands on a towel and turned toward the hallway. She met Tessa's furious stare with the same look she used to wear when administering shots to frightened patients, steady, clinical, unwilling to flinch. "I didn't erase you," Evelyn said plainly. "You were never written in." Tessa's mouth opened, but no sound came. It wasn't confusion, it was disbelief at the lack of drama, the absence of rage. She was prepared for a fight. But Evelyn offered only resolution. Mark glanced at the floor, then at his wife. "Maybe we should just—" Evelyn raised a hand gently. "No need." And with that, she turned and walked down the hall toward her room, her back straight, her breath even. She shut the door behind her, not loudly but with deliberate finality. At her desk, she opened her laptop and typed a brief email to Sonia. Subject: Confirmation copies. Hi. Sonia, please prepare 2 official confirmation packets, one for Mark, one for Tessa. Include trustee certification, revocation language, and title summary. Serve by courier with signature required. Best, Evelyn Harper. She reread it once. Then hit send. By the time she closed her laptop, the house had gone quiet again. Not out of resolution, just resignation. A knock came softly a few minutes later, 3 light taps against the back door. Camille stepped inside holding a to-go tray with 2 cups of tea and a paper bag that smelled faintly of cardamom and rosemary. "I brought you the good kind," she said. "Cinnamon oat milk with that weird flour thing you like." Evelyn took the cup, hands wrapping around the warmth like it held more than steam. "Thank you." Camille watched her a moment, then asked gently, "Do you want me here for a while? Maybe the next few weeks?" Evelyn didn't hesitate. "Yes." Camille nodded. "I'll start moving my things after lunch." They spent the next few hours clearing out the guest room. The throw pillows Tessa had chosen, stark, gray, sterile, were tossed into a donation bin. Evelyn brought out a faded quilt she and her husband had bought at a roadside antique shop in Vermont. Camille strung soft lights across the headboard, unpacked a stack of mystery novels, and added a plant to the windowsill. It wasn't elaborate, but it felt like it belonged. Later that evening, Evelyn had a locksmith come by. She watched as he installed a new deadbolt on her bedroom door, testing it twice. Only 2 keys were made. One stayed with her. The other, she slid into a small velvet pouch, placed in her jewelry box, and shut the lid. When the house quieted once more, Evelyn sat on the edge of her bed with her planner open in her lap. She flipped through the week's schedule, nothing major. Doctor's appointment, grocery run, a line marked, check deed copies. Then, just below it, a calendar alert flashed on the screen. Mark's birthday, tomorrow. Evelyn stared at it for a long moment. Her hand hovered. Then, with one quiet tap, she pressed delete. No alarm, no pop-up, just a silent erasure of something that no longer belonged on her timeline. Outside her window, Camille was watering the hydrangeas, humming softly to herself. And inside, Evelyn finally felt like the house was her own again, protected, precise, and just quiet enough to breathe. Evelyn gets a calendar alert. Mark's birthday. She deletes it. They still walked like heirs. I changed the locks like an owner. It took less than 20 minutes to have the new keys cut. Evelyn watched from behind the glass counter as the locksmith sliced through metal. Precise, quiet, final. When he handed her the two duplicates, she tested both in the shop door herself, listening to the clean turn of the pins. No more copies, no emergency spares in the junk drawer, just her and Camille. Back home, she slid the brass into her palm, feeling the cool weight of decision. Later that afternoon, Mark appeared in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a glass of water like it was a peace offering. "Hey," he said, "do you have a copy of the new key? For emergencies, I mean." Evelyn didn't stop slicing the lemons. She looked up, measured his face for sincerity, and replied, "If it's an emergency, you can knock." Mark blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. "I didn't mean, I just thought it made sense." She placed the knife down gently, wiping her hands on a dish towel. "It does. For the people who live here." Mark opened his mouth, then closed it again. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and left the room. That evening, Evelyn lit a lavender candle in her room, poured herself a cup of chamomile, and began printing out a simple sheet. 8 bullet points, neatly formatted, each one written without apology. House expectations. Quiet hours, 9 p.m., 8 a.m. Guests must be approved in advance. Kitchen and common areas to be cleaned after use. No redecorating or furniture removal. Do not share Evelyn's personal items. Camille has her own key. Respect her space. Wi-Fi password changes weekly. Ask before use. This is not a shared property. This is Evelyn's home. She tacked it to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a sunflower, one of the last things she and her husband had bought together during a road trip to Oregon. The next day, Tessa threw a dinner party. There was no discussion, no heads up. Evelyn walked in from her late afternoon walk to find the dining table extended, her linens replaced with a stark black runner, and her flatware already laid out. 3 couples were laughing in the living room, sipping wine that had been poured into glasses Evelyn didn't recognize. At the stove, Tessa stirred a pot of something fragrant while playing music loud enough that it swallowed the air. Evelyn said nothing. She stepped into the kitchen, pulled the speaker cord from the outlet, and watched the song sputter into silence. One guest looked up, startled. Tessa spun around. "Excuse me, what are you doing?" Evelyn didn't raise her voice. "Turning off what doesn't belong? This is my gathering. This is my house." Camille entered then, setting her bag down near the stairs. She scanned the room, saw the setup, the frozen moment, the power struggle laced in table settings. She walked up beside Evelyn. "I believe the phrase is, 'This is not your venue.'" Tessa flushed. One of her friends cleared his throat, another muttered something about needing to check a sitter. Evelyn didn't tell them to leave. She didn't need to. By the time she returned to her room an hour later, the wine bottles had been collected, the dishes stacked haphazardly in the sink, and the house was quiet again. That night, she updated the Wi-Fi settings on her router. New password, Respect Here 23. She wrote it down on a slip of paper, tucked it inside a drawer, and didn't offer it to anyone. The next morning, she came downstairs to find Tessa banging cabinets shut one by one, louder than necessary. Camille was at the table already, flipping through the paper. When Evelyn entered, Tessa turned with wild eyes. "She's unstable," she hissed. "We need to do something." Evelyn didn't answer. She just picked up the kettle, poured water over her tea bag, and stirred slowly. And somewhere behind her eyes, the storm was already done, but outside the window, the clouds were just starting to form. Tessa slams a cabinet and screams, "She's unstable. We need to do something." "She called me unstable. I called a notary." By the time the kettle cooled, Evelyn had already made up her mind. The word unstable had landed like a pin dropped in an empty hallway, small, metallic, and loud enough to echo. She'd seen it before, in hospital charts and whispered family meetings. Once that word appeared, it never came alone. It invited doubt, patronizing glances, and slow theft of decision-making. That morning, she put on her navy cardigan, the one with deep pockets and silent resolve stitched into every seam, and drove herself to her physician's office. Dr. Gale was a man she'd known for over a decade, with a fondness for puzzles and low-sodium pretzels. He raised his eyebrows when she explained what she needed. "Cognitive baseline?" he asked gently. "Everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Evelyn said. "I just want it documented." They ran the tests: memory recall, pattern sequences, timed logic. Evelyn passed with scores that surprised even him. She left the clinic with a notarized letter folded inside a manila envelope. By the time she returned home, Sonia already had an email in her inbox with the subject line, "Cognitive Competency Certificate," for file. That evening, she sat at her desk and reviewed the security footage. Not obsessively, not with bitterness, just a quiet scan. She bookmarked timestamps. Doors slammed, a tossed dish towel, Tessa pulling down Evelyn's house expectations list and tossing it toward the recycling. She added a note to her log. 1:16 p.m. Tessa removed sign from fridge, no words spoken, passive escalation. Camille knocked twice and entered carrying a folder of her own. "Thought you might want to add these," she said, placing a few printed text transcripts on the table. Tessa's group chat posts had become less subtle. "Living with a relic," one had read. Another, "Wish us luck surviving the dictator of doilies." "Thank you," Evelyn said, adding them to her documentation binder, now alphabetized by topic. They worked together in silence for a while, until Camille looked up. "You know what you need?" Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "A courtroom?" "Nope. Something more binding. Write out actual terms." Evelyn considered that for a moment. By nightfall, she had created a document on cream linen paper with a simple title, "House Terms Agreement, Live Here, Respect Here, or Leave Here." It wasn't legal in a courtroom sense, but it didn't need to be. It was declarative, clear, laminated and pinned to the hallway wall just outside the guest room, no signatures required. The next morning, Evelyn made tea and waited. Tessa passed the hallway once, didn't comment, passed it again in the afternoon, paused and then walked away. No slamming, no muttering, no sarcastic jabs, just silence. It lasted 2 days. Camille used the time to help reorganize the pantry. Evelyn replaced her old baking tins. She updated her passwords again, this time using the titles of her favorite poems. She called Sonia once to check in. Everything was quiet on the legal front. Too quiet. On the third morning, Evelyn went to grab the envelopes from the entry table drawer, the one near the key bowl where they kept random coupons and utility flyers. She shuffled through, eyes scanning for the electric bill. And then she saw it. A trifold brochure tucked neatly in between. Sunrise Moving and Storage, stress-free relocation, personalized estimates, quick turnaround. No note, no date, no handwriting. But on the bottom corner, faintly circled in blue pen, were the words, 2-bedroom, climate-controlled. Evelyn stared at it for a moment longer, then slipped it into her log binder under the tab labeled Intentions. She didn't smile, but her shoulders lowered half an inch, because preparation had always been her best defense, and now it was also her quietest offense. Evelyn finds a moving company brochure in the kitchen drawer. They planned their exit. I prepared for my piece. The morning broke unusually quiet. No footsteps overhead, no coffee grinder clattering too early, no passive-aggressive shuffling of chairs at the kitchen island. Just birdsong and the hum of Evelyn's tea kettle. She stood at the front window in her robe, mug in hand, steam curling under her chin. Across the driveway, the white SUV sat idling, trunk open. Tessa was dragging 2 roller bags down the front steps, her face focused but unreadable. Mark followed with a box, unlabeled and light enough to carry one-handed. Neither of them looked toward the house. There was no confrontation, no apology, not even a knock on the door, just the slam of the trunk, just the quiet click of the front gate, just departure. Evelyn watched without blinking, not in anger, just in acknowledgement. Some exits didn't need applause, just observation. The SUV backed down the driveway. She didn't wave. At the corner of her vision, Camille's red hatchback pulled in from the other end of the block, pausing just long enough for the other car to pass. She parked, grabbed a paper bag from the passenger seat, and let herself in through the side door. She kicked her shoes off quietly and rounded the corner into the kitchen, catching sight of Evelyn still standing by the window. "They gone?" Evelyn nodded. Camille looked out briefly, then back to her aunt. "Was that it?" Evelyn took a sip of her tea and replied, "That was it." They didn't linger in the moment. Camille pulled herbs from the bag, laid lemons and a fresh baguette on the counter. She sliced the bread, toasted it under the broiler. Evelyn pulled down the etched glasses from the cabinet, the ones she only used when the company was right, and filled them with chilled, sparkling water. They toasted in the dining room, under the soft light of the antique fixture Tessa had once called cluttered. "2 empty rooms," Camille said, raising her glass. Evelyn touched hers to it. "To clarity." Later that evening, after the dishes were rinsed and Camille had left to pick up a few boxes from her apartment, Evelyn returned to her office and opened the bottom drawer of her desk. She removed the envelope marked, "Last Will, Draft." It had been updated twice already, but now the air in the house allowed for finality. She uncapped her pen and began a 3rd revision. Camille was now the sole beneficiary. Not just of the house, but of the accounts, the valuables, the personal effects with meaning. Her name was listed as executor. She would inherit the rights to Evelyn's story, her journals, even the hand-bound copy of the funded ghost Evelyn had privately printed. She folded the new draft with care and placed it in a separate folder marked Final, pending notarization. Then, almost as an afterthought, she opened her laptop and drafted a short message to Mark. Subject, house body. Thank you for the space. She hit send. No attachments, no explanation. Just truth. She turned off the lamp and walked upstairs. That night, sleep came easier than it had in months. No doors creaked open after midnight. No late-night streaming from the guest room. No perfume in the air that didn't belong. Just Evelyn, the dark, and the certainty of her boundaries. She woke early to the soft beep of her phone, a missed call from Sonia, then a text. "Call me when you can. Tessa's filed a counter request. She's trying to freeze the trust." Evelyn didn't panic. She didn't sigh. She sat on the edge of her bed, legs steady against the floor, and reread the message. The sun was just cresting over the neighbor's chimney, casting a slant of light across her nightstand. It wasn't the start of a war. It was simply paperwork. And Evelyn had all the right documents ready. Sonia calls. "There's a counter request filed by Tessa, attempting to freeze the trust." She tried to pause my progress. I filed my proof. The courthouse sat like an unremarkable brick spine in the center of town, quiet, solid, and unbothered by the daily squabbles that passed through it. Evelyn walked its steps slowly, not from frailty, but because she'd learned long ago that moving with purpose unsettled those who came with panic. Sonia met her at the entrance, hair pulled back, black portfolio in hand. "It won't take long," she said. Tessa's motion was sloppy, rushed, and more emotional than legal. They walked through the metal detector, past a clerk who looked up briefly and nodded at Sonia. Familiarity did half the work. Inside the hearing room, the air was cold and sterile, the windows frosted with bureaucratic detachment. Tessa was already seated, arms folded, jaw tight. Mark sat beside her, visibly uncomfortable, eyes darting everywhere but Evelyn's direction. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp reading glasses and an expression that read like, Granite reviewed the paperwork for several minutes before speaking. Petitioner asserts that Ms. Harper is not of sound mind and may be acting under undue influence, she said, voice dry. Is there evidence? Sonia stood, calm. Your Honor, we've submitted a notarized cognitive competency exam dated within the last 10 days. Additionally, we've included corroborating behavior logs, timestamps, and digital security footage showing clear and consistent autonomy. She passed the binder forward. And the named successor? The judge asked. Sonia nodded. Ms. Camille Richards' niece. No criminal history, no financial conflicts, no cohabitation prior to this dispute. The judge flipped a few more pages. Paused. I see no basis for this request, she said flatly. Petition denied. Tessa let out a breath sharp enough to draw attention. The judge didn't look at her. Furthermore, the judge added, glancing briefly toward Evelyn, the trust as constructed appears ironclad. I advise all parties not to test its resilience. The gavel tapped once. The sound felt louder than it was. Evelyn stood, nodded once to the bench, and walked out. She didn't look at her son, and he, again, said nothing. Outside, Sonia smiled faintly. Not bad for a Thursday. Evelyn exhaled, the courthouse doors closing behind them. Let's make it permanent. Sonia tilted her head. You mean, I want a no contest clause added to the will. If anyone challenges any provision, they get nothing. Not a candlestick, not a photo, nothing. Sonia's smile sharpened. Consider it done. By the time Evelyn returned home, Camille had already lit the citronella candles on the porch and started arranging small bundles of eucalyptus near the front steps. Guess what? She said, waving a paper fan. It's party weather. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. I invited your book club, Camille continued. And your neighbor with the garden gnome collection. Also one of the notaries from Sonia's office. She brought sourdough. It wasn't a party in the grand sense. Just folding chairs, mismatched plates, and cold, sparkling water with lemon slices floating near the rim. But everyone who came brought something. A casserole, a pair of slippers, a small framed photo of a garden Evelyn once mentioned offhandedly during a book discussion. They toasted with plastic cups. To the home that stood tall, Camille declared. Evelyn looked around at the faces, some familiar, some fuzzy with age, but all warm. Later that night, she placed a basket of thank you cards on the counter. She folded her cardigan across the back of her reading chair, and for the first time in over a year, she let herself sleep with the door cracked open. She woke at dawn, the sun spilling soft and gold across the hardwood. When she opened her laptop to check her morning emails, a new message sat unread. From mark.harper@email.com. Subject, talk? Body, can we meet? Just us. No lawyers, no Camille. I think we need to talk. Alone. Evelyn stared at the screen. Then she stood, poured her tea, and let the message wait. Because a request doesn't erase silence, and clarity doesn't ask for permission. Mark emails her. We should talk. Alone. Now he wanted conversation. I only had conclusions. Evelyn chose the park near the old elementary school, not because it was sentimental, but because it was neutral. The benches were faded, the paths cracked, but the air held no memories that could interfere. The sun filtered through a row of tired sycamores, their leaves just beginning to crisp at the edges. Mark was already there, sitting on the far end of the bench beneath the shade, wearing a sweatshirt Evelyn remembered from college, a decade too old, sleeves pushed to the elbows. He stood when he saw her, unsure whether to reach out or keep his hands at his sides. Evelyn sat without invitation. No smile, no question, just presence. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Thanks for meeting me, he said. Evelyn looked out over the empty playground. I came for closure, not conversation. Mark let out a shallow breath. I didn't expect things to get this far. She turned to him. What did you expect? He blinked. I don't know. I thought maybe you'd want to talk it through. Talk? Her voice was calm. You mean now? After 9 months of nodding at insults and excusing entitlement? Now that it's legally out of your hands? Mark flushed. It wasn't that simple. I was trying to keep the peace. Evelyn's eyes were steady. You kept the quiet, Mark. not the peace. There's a difference. He looked down at his hands. Tessa, she said things sometimes. I didn't agree with all of it. You didn't disagree either, Evelyn replied. You married someone who thought my roof was her entitlement. And you stood in the room while she treated it like a waiting room for her inheritance. Mark winced. It wasn't like that. She leaned back slightly. It was exactly like that. And I know because I watched you not stop it. They sat in silence, the breeze moving slow through the leaves. A jogger passed, nodding politely. Mark looked at her again, his voice low. Is there still a chance for us to fix this? For me to be part of it again? Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. Not dramatic, just factual. Inside, a final copy of the trust, notarized and signed. She placed it gently on the bench between them. You were never removed, Mark, she said. You just didn't show up to stay. His lips parted, but no words came. I don't owe you a reset, she added. I gave you time, and you gave me silence. Evelyn stood, adjusted her cardigan, looked out once more at the rusted swings swaying empty in the breeze. Then she turned and walked away, leaving the envelope like a tombstone between them. She didn't check to see if he picked it up. She didn't need to. Back at the house, Camille was already on the front porch, kneeling on the welcome step with something curled under her arm. As Evelyn approached, she caught sight of the new mat being unrolled, woven in bold lettering, soft gray on slate, "Welcome home, no permission needed." Evelyn paused at the foot of the step, looked down, then looked up. Camille grinned, brushing her hands off on her jeans. Felt like time. Evelyn stepped over the mat, unlocked the door, held it open. Come in, she said. Let's start from here. Camille walks out with a welcome home mat. They thought they owned the narrative. I owned the roof. The morning after the park, Evelyn brewed her tea with a stillness she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't calm by absence. It was calm by completion. Outside, the sun filtered through the curtains she'd chosen herself, soft against the maple floors. Camille padded barefoot into the kitchen, hair still damp from a shower, and began cracking eggs into a bowl without asking where things were. She knew. Evelyn opened her laptop, navigated to her insurance portal, and clicked into the beneficiary section. Mark's name, once listed by default, was already a faint ghost in her memory. She deleted the line, typed in Camille Richards, relationship, niece, contact, same as above. She saved the changes, then printed a hard copy for her records, signing the bottom with a quiet kind of finality, the kind that didn't need to be announced. It simply lived, like sunlight warming the floorboards. By noon, she had made another call, to her broker. There was a small stock account she hadn't touched in years, inherited from her mother, left to grow out of habit more than need. Sell it, she said, all of it. Are you sure, Miss Harper? The voice on the other end asked. Yes, Evelyn replied. I'm replacing the windows. The quote had come in weeks ago, too high to feel responsible, but now it felt symbolic. New windows meant new eyes on the world, and insulation from the chill of past drafts. That same afternoon, she and Camille loaded the old guest room furniture into the back of Camille's car. The bed frame squeaked as they carried it down the steps, the mattress bending comically at the corners. They drove it to a local shelter, where a kind-eyed woman at the front desk gave Evelyn a clipboard and thanked her 3 separate times. It's still good furniture, Camille said on the drive back. I'm not discarding it, Evelyn said. I'm giving it to someone who'll ask before moving it. The next morning, Evelyn stood in the garden with a spade in one hand and 3 young hydrangea bushes in the other. Her husband had loved them, called them grateful flowers. They bloomed again and again, even when trimmed back hard. She dug slowly, hands aching a little, back stiff, but the kind of pain that felt worth something. Camille stood nearby, reading the tags aloud and handing her gardening gloves without being asked. By mid-morning, the plants were in. Soil pressed firm, roots given room. Evelyn sat on the porch steps, sipping water and watching bees flit lazily between the leaves. I have something, Camille said, disappearing into the garage. She returned with a small wooden mailbox. Painted by hand, its surface a swirl of deep navy and gentle gray, the words stenciled across the side in soft, serif lettering, "Still here." Evelyn blinked, then laughed. Not a quiet chuckle, not a surprised exhale, but a full laugh, round and real, the kind that shook her shoulders slightly. "I figured it needed saying," Camille offered, out loud and in weather-resistant acrylic. They mounted it together near the front gate, where the sunlight could hit it by late afternoon. That night, after dinner, Evelyn opened her mail and found a thick envelope from the State Elder Affairs Bureau. Inside was a formal letter on gold-trimmed stationery. "We're honored to invite Evelyn Harper to speak at the Senior Financial Safety Seminar, Legacy Without Silence Protecting What You Build. Please confirm your availability." Evelyn read it twice, then set it on the table beside her empty teacup. Camille looked up. "You going?" Evelyn nodded slowly. "Yes." She paused, then added, "On one condition." Camille raised an eyebrow. "You introduce me." She says yes. With one condition, Camille introduces her. "They erased me with a whisper," I answered with a signature. The seminar was held in a glass-walled conference center overlooking a stretch of State Park where autumn had arrived all at once. Burnt gold, deep rust, and long shadows across gravel trails. Evelyn wore a slate blue blouse and carried a leather portfolio Camille had gifted her that morning, with her initials pressed in silver on the bottom corner. Inside were 2 copies of her speech, a pen, and a packet of financial safety resources she'd requested be handed out after. But she wouldn't be starting the event. That job belonged to Camille. They waited in the wings as the small auditorium filled, rows of chairs, a modest podium, a banner behind them that read in bold serif letters, "Housing and Honor. What you own, what you guard." Camille stepped to the mic first, chin high but voice soft. "I'm here today to introduce someone who never asked for applause, only acknowledgement. Someone who taught me that boundaries are not walls, they're blueprints." She glanced over at Evelyn. "Please welcome my aunt, Evelyn Harper." Evelyn walked slowly to the podium. No nerves, no rushing. Just the sound of her own shoes against the polished floor. She began without theatrics. "I didn't lose my home," she said. "I almost gave it away by staying polite." The room quieted as she continued, not with outrage, but with unadorned truth. She described the slow erosion, the overlooked dismissals, the comments meant to shrink. She detailed the paperwork she used as protection, the way silence can become an accomplice when left unchallenged. "I was told to be grateful," Evelyn said. "Instead, I became thorough." She didn't name Tessa. She didn't have to. She ended by holding up a single sheet from her trust documents. "This is what a signature looks like when it's not about assets, but dignity." In the back row, a woman in a gray cardigan dabbed her eyes quietly. When the Q&A ended, the woman approached with hands shaking slightly. "I've been housing my son and his wife for 3 years," she whispered. "I thought if I said anything I'd lose him, but I think I already have." Evelyn didn't offer advice. She handed her a slim folder. "Start with this," she said. "Then call your name first next time." As the crowd thinned, the event coordinator approached, clipboard in one hand, a phone in the other. "We're planning a national series," she said, eyes bright. 4 cities next year, financial resilience, elder safety, women and home ownership. Would you be willing to lead the flagship?" Evelyn paused, then nodded. "I don't want to be the loudest voice," she said. "I just want to be the one who says it first." After the event, she and Camille walked along the park trail in silence. The leaves crunched beneath their feet, and the sun had begun its slow dip behind the trees. They didn't talk about the speech. They didn't need to. Legacy had a texture now. It breathed, it echoed, it held. Back at the house, Camille opened her laptop at the dining table and turned the screen toward Evelyn. "I've been working on something," she said. The homepage loaded slowly. White background, navy text, and a single line beneath a hand-drawn sketch of Evelyn's house. The house she built a digital archive for women who refuse to be written out. Evelyn read the tagline twice. Her eyes stung, just briefly. Then she reached for Camille's hand. "Publish it," she said. And this time, her voice didn't waver. Camille shows her a draft website, the house she built. They moved out. I moved forward. Evelyn didn't expect it to go beyond a few clicks, maybe a handful of shares from Camille's old college friends, a polite comment from someone who once read her blog and forgot to unfollow. But 2 days after Camille hit publish, the inbox attached to the website started buzzing. The subject lines all sounded eerily alike. This happened to me. I needed this today. My daughter-in-law called me a guest in my own home. How do I start? It wasn't viral in the way youth defined it, no trending hashtags or viral dances. It was quieter than that, a steady hum, like a frequency only women of a certain generation could hear. Forums with names like Second Phase Finance and The Quiet Room began posting quotes from Evelyn's seminar. Within a week, Sonia called. "You have more reach than some law firms," she said. "Have you thought about offering direct support?" Evelyn glanced at Camille, who was already halfway through a spreadsheet. "We've been thinking about it," she replied. "Actually, we're ready." Together, they drafted a one-page hotline plan, a referral system for legal clinics, elder advocates, and pro bono estate planning volunteers in 5 states. Camille built the landing page. Sonia offered language for consent disclaimers. Evelyn handwrote the tagline, "Boundaries are estate planning too." They launched it quietly, no press, no pressuring, just a number, a form, a promise of protection without condescension. The first call came in within 48 hours. The next project was Evelyn's idea. She spent 2 days reviewing every journal entry she'd ever made since Tessa and Mark moved in. Then, with Camille's help, she distilled it into a 30-page downloadable PDF guide. Before you let them move in a practical, plus emotional checklist for homeowners. It included questions like, do you feel free in your own kitchen? Who holds the key and the authority that comes with it? If this were a lease, would you still offer it? The guide went live on a Thursday. By Sunday night, it had been downloaded over 8,000 times. That Monday, Evelyn did something she hadn't done since she moved in 42 years ago. She framed something and hung it by the front door. It wasn't a family photo. It wasn't a quote from her late husband. It was the title page of her guide, printed on thick cardstock, centered perfectly in a copper frame. Underneath it, in her handwriting, "Grateful to no one. Answerable to myself." Camille walked by and paused, head tilted. "You know what you need now?" she asked, mischief in her voice. Evelyn narrowed her eyes. "Please don't say new wallpaper." Camille disappeared into the mudroom and returned holding a rolled-up doormat, still wrapped in brown paper. "I had it made last week. Figured the last one was too subtle." Evelyn peeled back the paper to reveal the words stenciled in clean black block letters, "Owner." She bent down, placed it at the threshold, and pressed one palm flat against the bristles. Not to clean her hands, but to claim something. That evening, she lit a candle in the living room, pulled her knees up on the sofa, and reread the last handful of messages from strangers turned sisters in experience. One read, "I left my own home because my son said I was too loud. I didn't even own a stereo." Another, "Your speech made me realize I still have time to write my own ending." Evelyn closed her laptop and sipped her tea, the house around her still and humming with new purpose. Her phone buzzed. A new message preview lit up the screen. Subject, book club invitation from assistant producer at oprahreds.org. Message, "Hello, Mrs. Harper. We'd love to discuss your work for Oprah's book club. Are you open to a conversation?" Evelyn stared at it, then whispered softly to herself, the way one speaks to a long-awaited guest at the door. "Well, I did say I wasn't finished." Evelyn gets a message. "Oprah's book club wants to talk. She called it a roof. I called it mine." The sun had just begun to crest over the edge of the fence line when Evelyn stepped into the garden. The air was soft with morning and mulch. A few bees traced lazy loops near the hydrangeas, now rooted and blooming more boldly than she'd dared to hope. She bent down, touched the soil, and let her fingers press into it, not for work, not for show, but to remember that this, too, was hers. She didn't need to pull weeds today, not in the garden, not anywhere. Pinned to the mailbox was a card tucked under the red flag, Camille's handwriting in its unmistakable curl. Inside, "Thank you for giving me roots and wings. Most people get one. You gave me both. Evelyn read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and slipped it into the back of her gardening journal. Back inside, the house held the kind of stillness that had nothing to do with absence. It was not empty. It was composed. The walls no longer echoed with things unspoken. They absorbed her quiet and returned it as peace. At the dining table, Evelyn opened her laptop. The email from Oprah's book club had been answered. Her materials submitted. An excerpt from her seminar featured on their blog. And now her name appeared on the cover slide of a national financial literacy curriculum for older women. Legacy Through Paperwork, Protecting What You Build, featuring Evelyn Harper. She closed the tab gently, not out of modesty, but because she didn't need to keep proving anything, not even to herself. She turned to her side and noticed the table itself, its surface long polished, its legs steady. This was where Tessa once commented on her dusty tea rituals, where Evelyn had once overheard entitlement masquerading as a whisper. That day felt distant now, like someone else's weather. She made her tea, one Earl Grey bag in her favorite ceramic mug. Stirred with a spoon her husband had once claimed made everything taste better, though she knew it was just sentiment. She sat down at the table, not to defend anything, but to enjoy it. No voices rose behind her. No glances were exchanged over her head. No silent tension shrank her shoulders. Only the soft hiss of the kettle cooling, the scent of lemon and bergamot, and the open book waiting beside her. After a while, Evelyn stood and walked to the hallway closet. She reached for the fireproof box, lifted its lid, and pulled out the deed, creased but firm, still bearing her name across the top in thick official ink. She looked at it a long time, then folded it neatly and placed it back into the file labeled in block letters, Unshakable. She closed the box, locked it, and returned it to its place, not hidden, but secure. That afternoon, Camille joined her in the sunroom with 2 glasses of iced mint tea and a pile of envelopes from readers. Some were thank you notes, others were requests. A few were just stories scrawled in long, looping script, written by women who had spent decades saying nothing and were now learning how to say enough. They sorted the letters together while music played softly in the background, a jazz playlist Evelyn had titled Porchlight Legacy. Camille looked up, catching Evelyn mid-sip. "You ever think you'd come this far?" Evelyn smiled without hesitation. "Number. But I knew I'd never go back." Evening fell gently, and for once there was nothing left to revise, no pending signatures, no performances, no doors waiting to be closed behind her. Just a roof she had built, a house she had reclaimed, and a foundation that wouldn't be shaken again. "They thought I had a roof. I had the whole foundation,"